Hey, this is Sandra coming to you direct from Hayward, California, the heart of the San Francisco Bay Area, where I was born and raised. Who I am in a nutshell. I am a first-generation Chicana in the U.S., also the first in my family to go to college. My parents are immigrants from Mexico. I have a bachelor's degree in Chicano Studies from UC Berkeley and my master's degree in counseling from Cal State Hayward. I have been a California community college counselor for the past 20 years. I provide academic, career, and personal counseling in one-on-one sessions, as well as in college success courses. In these Brown Bag podcasts, my intention is to share my experiences working with my community and my college students. You will meet some of my mentors and awesome colleagues who have motivated me to continue doing the work that I do.
Hello, my name is Monique Williams. I am currently an English instructor at Chabot College. I work with the Emoja program. I am the tri-chair of the Student Access, Success, and Equity Committee, and I am a member of the CCEPG. I was born and raised in Hayward, California, and I am a proud Chabot College graduate. I earned a BA from Mills and an MA from San Francisco State, but I never left Chabot. It's my home, and I have been a part of the institution in many different ways. I've been a student, an administrator, and now I'm a teacher. I have had the privilege of seeing the college through 3 different lenses. I joined the Brown Bag podcast because of the 2 women I get to be in conversation with, Sandra and Carmen. These women, with a lot of care, teach me more about how to best serve the Chabot College community. I hope listening to this podcast will give you the same opportunity for growth that each conversation with these women gives to me.
What's up, everyone? It's Carmen Johnston, aka Mrs. J, aka Queen Carmi, aka DJ Carm Brulee, here and ready to build knowledge with my 2 amazing co-hosts. I am a Black woman born and bred in the Bay Area. I am a proud Gen Xer, radiant English professor, and pop culture enthusiast. I have a bachelor's in liberal studies and master's in English creative writing, both from San Francisco State University. I've worn several hats at Chabot College, ranging from co-founding the Change It Now learning community to co-leading the Chabot Collaborative for Equity and Professional Growth. Mostly, though, I'm interested in transformation by holding space for difficult conversations that will ultimately move us all closer to a more equitable college and more just world.
All right, so thank you for joining us on the Brown Bag podcast. We're here with Juan Diego and, of course,
Juan Pablo.
Juan Pablo. Sorry.
Juan Diego sounds nice.
You know what? I'm reading this book, Gordo. Have you ever read it?
No, but I've seen it. Yeah.
So it's really, really good. And then we just went over Juan Diego today, so sorry. Juan Pablo. So we're meeting with Juan Pablo. We're talking about the beautification of the campus, the great mural that we have, and also to think about what's to come. But before we start all of that serious talk, what we usually ask is just what's giving you life. And I thought because you're here and we're talking about art, maybe we could say, what's an art piece that's giving us life? So that's a little tricky, or a piece of art or artwork or something you see as art in the world giving you life.
Thanks. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. What a great sort of topic. Super excited about that. I'd say right now what's giving me life is so fortunate. Last Friday, I had a free Friday. There was actually a symposium in Berkeley, the Latinx Research Center, and it was a very small, intimate symposium with Amalia Mesa Baines, who's this amazing veterana Chicana artist who's really famous and probably one of the most sort of iconic altar makers that we've had. She has pieces at the Smithsonian. She's a MacArthur Genius Grant Award winner. She has a PhD in psychology. She's just this amazing woman. And right now at the BAMFA, they have a retrospective of her work. And so I just spent all Friday morning in that exhibit. I don't know if there's one particular piece, but just seeing all of the pieces, over the years that she's sort of done is just so amazing. And then got to spend the late afternoon to early evening with a group of art historians. And usually art historians aren't the funnest people in the world, right? But this particular group, since they were mostly all Chicanas and Chicanos, was a really great space to be in and just sort of thinking about the impact of her work and the real sort of significance, of her work, and really sort of trying to, a lot of her work deals with sort of like trying to heal trauma, right? Either personal trauma or sort of community or historical trauma. And so just really trying to sort of fleshing out like the different elements of her work, her pieces, was just amazing to see scholars from different generations. And then culminated with her, speaking for maybe half an hour, talking a little bit about sort of, where she's at in life, sort of, moving on, where she's at right now. It was amazing. Right? It was really amazing. The show is called Amalia Mesa Bain's An Archaeology of Memory. And it's been right now. It's there, I think, until like the middle of summer. You still have time to go check it out. And they do have guided tours there every now and then, like free Thursdays. So I think on one of the Thursdays of the month, it's free. So no admission. Highly recommend it. Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I want to check it out for sure.
Mm-hmm. Carmen, you have a piece or something that pops in your mind?
Well, I was thinking about how, my daughter goes to Oakland School of the Arts, which is in downtown Oakland. And one thing that I love is there's just a lot of like murals in downtown Oakland. So there's murals like up on a building, but they still have a lot of the murals around from the George Floyd protests. So I just love driving and seeing just all these images of, young people of color and just some really powerful messages. And it's just very affirming, when I'm picking my daughter up and we're hassling about homework, just to see these messages. Yeah, I'm just so glad that artwork is still up. So that definitely gives me life. And I will add that Beyonce's Renaissance album is still giving me life. I was like dancing in the kitchen today, and it just felt so good just to dance and like listen to that music. So I feel like music is probably one of the pieces of art that gives me the most life, like on a daily basis. So, yeah. Are you nod your head? Have you listened to the Renaissance album yet? Are you over here yet with me on Beyonce, Monique?
On me, I'm not completely over with you, because I remember I tried it. And you're like, let's do it at the gym. And it's like, I tried it. I do like some of it.
Oh, good.
And some of it I'm hitting skip.
There's a couple of songs that I skip over, but most of it I love.
But I was just thinking while you were talking about that it would be really cool, because a lot of our students, I don't know if it's just because of the way the world like blends art, really, like there's not a separation between it, like, and maybe also us coming from like the music video era, like all of a sudden we have music videos, right? If there was something on campus that had that blend, like I've gone to museums where it's like there's a painting and then there's also sound happening. Right. And then that change, like what you're looking at changes based on what's coming in your, like it just helps you kind of like take that step into a piece even more. So I was just thinking, while you were saying that, I was like, it's really cool. Cause like most of the time my piece is actually on Tennyson and Deli. It's a liquor store that's right on the corner from me. And I'm from Hayward. And there's this mural that's been there since I was a kid. It's a mural on the Tennyson Liquor and Deli. And some of it's kind of like faded now. Like kind of washed off, and people sometimes come and like redo little pieces of it and stuff like that. But I don't know who put it up. I mean, it's been there prior to the 80s. I don't know how it got there. And but it's kind of iconic, especially for neighborhood folks. So like people move out of the area and then they'll come back and shoot like their music videos and stuff like that in front of the mural. And it has a lot to do with like Chicano Latinx pride, and also this kind of like car culture, gang culture, community culture, like the religious aspect that St. Bede's is right down the street, like all of that is kind of mixed in there. And when I was a kid, I never looked at it, because it was just like, it was always there in the community. Now when I drive by it and I see it, it's like, I look at it, I know that's like it's a landmark for me, And so like, if it was ever gone, I don't know, it would feel like the neighborhood would feel completely different. Like I recognize how much power it has, that I would just feel, it would feel completely different if that wasn't there.
Wow.
So I think that's probably the piece for me. I just have so many memories associated with it. Nice. And it's weird because I don't know where it came from. I have no idea.
It's on Tennyson and what?
It's Tennyson and Pompano.
Okay.
Tennyson Liquor and Deli.
Okay.
And that's the building, and it's on the side of it. And it's just had so many different generations of people standing in front of it, like making things in front of it, walking past. It's just, we never talk about it. you know, like we're never like, it's not like something we talk about, but people actually, they know it. Like, you know, like Hayward people know it.
I have to go check that out.
Yeah. It's changed a little bit because of when people repaint to like fill it in, but it still has everything. Like there's little small additions that people make over time. You know, it'd be interesting to trace that. Like, what are the additions that were made and by who, you know? Yeah, it's cool.
One thing you said there was really striking. Like, you know, you were saying like, I looked at it, but I never looked at it. I think for me, like, my parents, I was born in Sacramento, and I would just spend my youth going to the Guadalupe Church in Midtown Sacramento. And going in there, it's like the historically Mexican neighborhood, and there would always be all kinds of murals and art in those neighborhoods. And kind of like you, it was sort of part of like my experience, but I never really looked at them, right? I never really understood like what was going on there. But in reality, it was sort of teaching me about my culture. It was teaching me about my history. You know, I just didn't necessarily have like the tools, right, to sort of really kind of make that connection. But what it was doing, it was sort of embedding that history in me through art in a very public way. And so like when you were sort of talking about that, I just kind of key back to kind of growing up. And I mean, I kind of like share that message with my students when I talk to them about historical circumstances in art. I'm saying, look, the history's there around us, and we're, you know, it's sort of, we just have to sort of figure out a way to kind of listen, right? And see it, you know, and that's cool that, I appreciate you sharing that, man.
Yeah, like even when I think about it, you know, like car culture, you know, like part of that mural is car culture. I was a little kid growing up in a home with like just the regular, like mom and pop had a little old Mercury, whatever, you know, like, but I wanted a lowrider so bad. I was going to get a bomb. I was going to slam it. I was going to chop the top, and it's on that mural. You know, you know, like,
well, you know that, I mean, and that has a whole history behind it as well, you know, and just like how, like, I mean, in a way, that lowrider, right, is sort of like, it was a rejection of kind of like the car culture, right, of the 50s and 60s, right, of everything fast in the freeway. It's like, we're going to slow it down. We're going to go low. We're going to listen to our music. It's claiming space. It's claiming sound, right, and through your culture, like a rejection of kind of that larger society telling you you don't have a sort of space here within us, right? Really sort of making that space in a very explicit way, I think is.
So cool. See, he's already going off. We haven't even asked the questions yet.
It kind of is a little bit like our first question. As a historian, right? It kind of talks about like what do these things do? So it's like, what role are you looking for art to serve in a community or on a campus? Like, what do you think it should be doing?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think for me, I always see like art as sort of like a historical project. You know, public memory is like so critical, and that's what public art is, right? It's a public memory. And for me, like the murals that I look at, I mean, I would say sort of all murals, sort of whether they do it intentionally or not, they're political, right? Whether they want to be or not. But I think sort of, you know, this notion of public memory, it really sort of, I see it as a way to kind of be able to critique a lot of these things that, you know, serve to kind of subjugate our communities, right? Or our experiences, our students, right? In particular, right? Like on campus, right? Public memory can serve as a way to critique like institutionalized patriarchy and white supremacy. I think that's a really important function of public memory, right? Through artwork. So I think that's like a really big part of it, you know, for me, right? For me. Yeah, for sure.
It's so powerful. I love that idea.
I was thinking about how, you know, like, especially like in the city of Hayward, we kind of like erased our Black history, right? We had, you know, Russell City, a thriving area, an area that contributed a lot to a lot of different things in the Bay Area, and especially to music. And then they had put up like a little mural. Like, you know, they were doing the Hayward murals, right? They put up like this little mural, and then people all of a sudden started asking questions, and they had like a, you know, like a Russell City, I don't know, what is it called? Like a reunion type thing, right? And so like you said, it's just like, you know, that little piece reinserted something that had been like erased, you know, like there was an erasure, and it actually, you know, helped to insert this like really important history, and then also have us ask questions like, well, where did the Black community go in Hayward? And what happened to all this music and this thriving industry and this beauty that was coming? We get to ask questions now, and recognize what did happen.
I think they're trying to do reparations too for Russell City residents.
They should
be talking about.
I had sort of written some notes, kind of just in preparing for this. But like speaking to your point there, Monique, I think what sort of this public art can also do is it really serves as a way to kind of reject the exclusivity of like historical narratives, right? So you're saying kind of like what happened to the Black community, right, of Hayward, right? Well, you're right. Russell City, right, unincorporated. And like sadly, right, that's a history that many other spaces, right, many other places in this state, in this country sort of have gone through. But in part, what I think the artwork can do is like it sort of, in a way, can sort of like reject or fail to accept sort of like a history that's more rooted in like Eurocentric sort of narratives, right? It sort of allows sort of for a more, I would say, like a more democratic way of sort of understanding the history, right, of this land, right? I also love that you're saying sort of people start asking questions, like in part, that's how I see it, like murals as like a really important educational tool, right? An inducative tool, right? In and of itself, as a way to sort of teach folks. I mean, thinking about at least kind of like the murals, like the great muralists of Mexico, right? Like we think of like Los Tres Grandes, right? Like Diego Rivera, José Clemente Orozco, and then David Alfaro Siqueiros, right? Los Tres Grandes. Like they were out to create these murals that really sort of told like the history of Mexico, because they were dealing with a population that was largely illiterate, right? How we sort of like underscore, like illiterate doesn't mean dumb, right? At all. It just means for whatever reason, folks didn't have the opportunity or the privilege to get a sort of formal education, right? To learn how to read, to learn how to write. And so like really sort of demonstrating and showing like visually like the indigenous history, like the Black and brown history of Mexico, right? And in a way rejecting sort of like this imposition, right, of these Eurocentric narratives, I think was a really important sort of directive, right, of that art process. And so, of course, as I see it sort of on campuses, right, it serves to educate, right? It serves to educate. And we have this really important opportunity, right, to kind of challenge like these ideas that the academy is sort of based on, right? That these are really important opportunities, to sort of reject or counter those sort of narratives and that ideology.
What are you thinking, Carmen?
I've always just loved listening to Juan Pablo. So I'm just like, yeah, go on. Keep going. Just keep going. It's very, I was laughing to myself because you listed all these muralists in Mexico, and you're like, and we know, I'm like, I don't know any of those people except for Diego Rivera. So I'm just happy to get educated, and to just learn more.
It's interesting too. I mean, like they do have like this really important impact, right? They all spend a lot of really important time, in the United States and California. They, I sort of make the argument in some of my research that it was in fact Siqueiros, not Rivera or Orozco, but it was Siqueiros who really sort of like laid the foundation for contemporary Chicano and Chicana muralists of the movement era, right, of the 60s and 70s, because he was actually sort of doing public art. But you're saying, gosh, I kind of didn't really like know these people. Well, in particular, because a lot of that art was sort of done in these spaces that, weren't meant for us, weren't meant for kind of like regular folks, right? Like Rivera, like all three of those artists spent time in California in the 1930s, right? For a lot of different reasons. Rivera does this really amazing mural, Allegory of California. It was on exhibit actually at right? Exactly. But again, right, that was in the Pacific Stock Exchange, right? That's a place, when it was done, a place for like the political and economic elite. Orozco did this amazing mural, Prometheus, but it was done in like the lunch commons at the Claremont colleges. So who's that sort of reserved for, right? Again, the elite, right? The racial elite, right? Or the children of those racial and political elite. Siqueiros, on the other hand, he does like this really amazing mural, America Tropical, in the Placita on Olvera Street, right? Like the most public of spaces, right? Above this sort of Bavarian beer garden, right? On Olvera Street. Now, that mural has all kinds of like explicit messages critiquing US imperialism and materialism. So of course, like, you know, like a week after it's sort of unveiled, it immediately sort of gets covered up and then whitewashed, like right after it's painted, right? But you know, I think there's a reason why like we don't a lot of times know about these folks is because you know, typically it's like gallery stuff or, you know, it's in these spaces that are reserved, right, for not the common people. And so I think that's like another reason why I think public art is so important, right? Because it really gives an opportunity to sort of tell stories, to share history, to challenge, right? To challenge and critique in a very public way, in a more democratic way, I'd argue.
Yeah, and I was thinking about like, you know, you're so passionate and knowledge about public art, and particularly public art that's been created by Mexican Americans, Chicanos, Mexican folks. And then we're at this campus that's an HSI, right? That's like the majority of our students are Latinx. And I just wonder like what it's been like for you, you know, as the chair of the public art committee to kind of bring all your passion and knowledge to a campus that kind of struggles, you know, to move in these directions, to challenge white supremacy, to embrace, you know, this idea of representation through art. I'm curious about like what that's been like for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, Carmen. I think sort of like this current iteration of the Public Art Committee, I think they're fantastic. I think like everybody in there has sort of like a shared commitment. We have very similar values. We sort of understand like the significance that public art can sort of bring, not just to our campus, but to our community at large. And so I think in particular with this sort of a mural, right? The first major mural, right, on our campus, right? As far as I know, as far as I can tell, you know, I think it was, you know, I think it was a very historic, but also very important and special sort of moment, you know, and again, like that was all student led, right? I think that was like, it was a student-led initiative. Like you talk about my experiences in the Public Art Committee, it's really sort of walking and shepherding it through like all this administrative sort of, for lack of a better word, like BS, right? It's like they were able to have the idea. They were able to get the artist. They were able to secure funding. They were on it, you know, and they were ready to go. But at some point, you know, it's like the powers that be are like, hey, stop, hold up. You know, and so like at that point, you know, like I don't want to say the power, but like our institutional position was able to sort of help the students sort of navigate. And it wasn't just me, right? There was so many people on that committee. Professor Kay Fisher, right, was so instrumental in this, helping sort of all along the way. Dean Kunkel Wu, because again, right, like you need administrators on here on this campus that are going to support you and really help you out. And I can say that Dion really played a really important part in this mural process as well, in terms of sort of supporting it and getting going. And, you know, and the students, you know, of course, right? The students were the central thing, you know, in getting this sort of mural going. You know, it was really amazing to kind of see them sort of really think about like, there is a need, right, for a public marker that represents our experiences, our frustrations, our joy, right, on this campus that really just represents us and just and go for it, you know. And like, gosh, like I was just amazed and awe, you know. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from the students in this process for sure.
Awesome. What are some like, you know, because part of this is talking about how we can shift towards making these great things that are kind of like increasing the visibility of our students and also making them feel more connected to the campus. You know, like what are some ways in which we can get rid of some of the challenges? You know, like what are some things that we can do better to make this process a little easier for, you know, like the next mural to go up? You know?
No, I think that's a great question also, Monique. I think that, you know, in the Public Art Committee, we've been trying to kind of like formalize a process. You know, as I was mentioning, kind of the students ended up having this idea, getting funding, and then they were kind of stopped. So we had to basically, as a committee, sort of like develop a call for artists, right? We had to develop like, you know, with sort of like the imagination that was animated by the students, what specifically they wanted in this mural. We had to develop a call for artists. We had to sort of, you know, develop a track of communication, not just with the office of the president, but also with the board, right? And so when you're saying kind of like what can be done, I think part of the charge that we're taking on in the committee, and I'm not just saying me, right? The committee at large is to try to develop policies that are clear and transparent that we can share with anybody and everybody on campus that is interested in wanting to do a mural, right? By no means are we sort of the arbiters, right, of what can go up, on this campus. I feel in part that public art committee is a way to kind of just help and support, like the ideas, right, and the motivation of our students, and the faculty and the staff on this campus. Folks from the student newspaper have reached out, right, saying like, there's such an amazing space up there, right? Brian has contacted me and we've met, right, about having artwork, right, a major piece, right, as part of the BCRC, right? Yes. So like, I think like, for us in the public art committee is kind of like develop, right, this sort of protocol that will help folks sort of navigate this process to where it's like, they won't have to go through kind of some of the same lumps and obstacles and challenges that we went through. But in a way, I think that was useful, right? Because we ended up sort of like forging this path. Now folks sort of moving forward, I think, will have a clear idea of expectations and what they need to be able to have, more pieces on campus, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Is there a budget or do people have to come with like their own money?
Yeah, so I think I would say yes and no, right? I think the public art committee in general doesn't have a budget. I mean, but I think when Diane Zuliani was the chair of the public art committee, and this was before I got to Chabot, and so I could be misspeaking here, so please correct me. Y'all been here a little bit longer, but there was like this large chunk of money that was awarded to both campuses, in particular to have public art, installed on this campus. And so like, of course, there's some things in the library. There's that big piece in Building 400, right? So there's like the Olmec heads that we see, in front of the library in Building 2. So there's a lot of different things on this campus, and so that was part of like a one-time money, right? That was sort of there to be able to fund those projects. But by and large, the public art committee doesn't have a budget, but that doesn't mean that like we can't go out and figure out how to get money. The students figured out how to get $10,000 for this mural. By the way, $10,000 for a mural like of that, like, is unheard of. Like that's something that should have, like the budget for that should have been like $40,000 or $50,000.
Wow.
It's probably on the cheap, So for Lizzie, right, Elizabeth Blancas, this amazing muralist, right, to be able to do what she did, right, to have this vision, to realize it and put it up on our wall for that amount of money is really, like, that's a miracle in and of itself, right? That's who we should be talking about. That's who we should be, she's an amazing, amazing artist. And it really kind of just really speaks to her commitment and dedication. A Chabot alum.
Right.
A Chabot alum, just an amazing, amazing person, right?
I actually have a quote from her, so we can talk about her.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
So I was looking up stuff and I was reading, because I was trying to think about like what need are we serving when we put up these murals, right? And so Elizabeth Blancas said, I can feel how impactful it would have been to have this mural to be greeted by Black and brown joy. So it's like, almost in that quote, I almost felt like a joy and a sadness, like I could feel how impactful this would have been. She wasn't able to have that moment, but is giving it to other people, and I just thought that was really beautiful, like to have that reflection and to be kind of honest about what was missing. We need to recognize the missingness of it,
Yeah, I mean, it is really hard to talk about, because I do remember when we got that money, and I do remember the process, right? I don't know if you were here, Monique, during that time period, but there
money
was
for art on the campus.
Yeah, the art on the campus, and like they, put proposals forth, and there was voting, and I think just the climate of the campus was different than what it is now, and there were challenges. There were issues. Like I know an instructor who wanted those quotes in front of 400 to be more people of color, and that was met with resistance and no. And I think a lot of the art that we have from that money is very beautiful, and it is of a certain European aesthetic. It is, which isn't really representative of our students. I think there are a lot of folks that were disappointed, but it's like, what can you do? So I think the mural that Lizzie made of Miss Mac and Tafa, is so, so important. And just like she said, I mean, it just sends such a powerful message to our incoming students. It tells them that they belong here, and this is a place for them. And I don't think the previous art did that. That is one of the big equity issues that we're up against, is that sense of belonging for our students, for college to feel like they belong and that this is a place for them. So I'm so happy that we have that mural, because it does really invite students in a way that the previous pieces, I don't know. I mean, we, in our equity work, we talk a lot about the culture of power and about how art and images kind of signify who's in power. And so I don't know. It's like, I don't want to, be hard on folks and criticize, but I'm glad that we have this mural here, right? To kind of
Well, what I would say about Lizzie's mural, I like from my perspective, right, is that I think it really is a nod to like the Chicana art that was developed, during the movement times, right, in the 60s and 70s. Like in and of itself, you can look at that mural and her work, right, as a form of protest. Like it's very explicit, it's very clear, right? Of course, there's joy. You can also like see sort of moments of like thoughtfulness and I don't want to say tension, but like this mural represents protest, right, in very specific ways. But at the same time, it's also an art of liberation. I think on many, I mean, like you kind of take a look at it. I have it up here, kind of. I'm just kind of taking a look at it on my screen, right? But Ms. Mac and her earrings, right?
Yeah.
This was a very important and significant moment, right, in sort of the reckoning of not just racial justice, but like the rejection of explicit public racialized violence in our country, right? It was accepted as a normalcy. And what this mural ends up doing, right, is part of that broader sort of critique, right? Part of that broader sort of movement of protest, right, against public lynchings.
Right.
At the same time, right, it's also a mural of liberation, right? And again, these are nods back to kind of like the tenets of the art, right, of the public art. And again, I wouldn't say just murals, but also posters and paintings as well. But in this mural, you can see very explicit indigenous and Chicana themes, right, in sort of the color schemes, in the flora and fauna that she uses, like all of those things, whether you see it explicitly or not, are there, right? And it really serves as sort of like this form of liberation, right? And inspiration when you see this. So, I mean, really sort of thinking about kind of like what this sort of mural represents, at least to me, right? It is, for me, it's a nod back to those movements of the 60s and 70s in very explicit ways. And Lizzie really is an extension of those movements, right? She really is, from the folks that she's been trained with, aspires to kind of like, have her work sort of, connect to. Like she really is an extension of those movements, right, of the 60s and 70s. And it's clear.
I was going to say too that I think it's also representing solidarity, right? Because Lizzie's a Latinx artist, and the murals of a Black woman and a Pacific Islander woman, which of course relates back to what you're talking about around liberation, because that was such a big part of those movements also, was about solidarity. And what a great, again, just like what a great message for incoming students.
Right. Even down to the details of fashion, so many of those choices are like reclaiming things that have been appropriated. And it's just like in every way, like how we were talking about, we just walk by it and we don't really read it. But then when you start reading it, you just see all of these things that take a lot of thought, but also give us, even just as walking by and not completely internalizing, because somewhere in our minds, we know it gives us power. Right? It gives us like a feeling of power. I will tell you that I've been on this campus for a long time, even as a student. And now as a faculty member, to have that mural up, it gives me something every single time I see it. I have never seen anything on this campus that actually represented the people in the community.
Yeah.
Until that moment. Right. And I was just like, it was almost like a shock to my system to feel a sense of belonging in that way. Right. And it's so powerful. It is so powerful.
I mean,
I want more.
Yeah, all over the place, everywhere.
Like one of the artists that I write about a lot is Judy Baca, right? This really amazing artist, Chicana from Southern California, did the Great Wall of Los Angeles, among many things, right? But that's probably like her most sort of like iconic sort of work, right? This massive, massive mural sort of dedicated to sort of like a real true history, right, of California and really like the United States, right, from a particular perspective, right, from a perspective of folks of color, from the perspective of women. One of her earliest murals was this band shell in Hollenbeck Park in LA, right? And it was titled Mi Abuelita. And it was an image of her grandmother, right? This brown woman, right? And for a woman of color to be like the center, right, of a piece of public art was like, it's unheard of, right? That was not what art was supposed to be or is, right? And that's in part why I kind of say this mural is a nod to kind of those movements and those artists. Like here we have up front, right? Black and brown women up front, right? As the central pieces of this, right? It really is sort of, this is their space. This is our space. This is sort of what it represents. And for me, I think that I think is such like an important part of this as well. You know, I wanted to go back though, Monique, to your comment about like how you were feeling sort of both sad, but also like inspired or happy from Lizzie's comments. You know, I also like, I struggle with those kind of two emotions as well. You know, even when I like teach my students about certain circumstances in history, I feel excited that we're moving towards like this moment of liberation, right? Or potential liberation, or having the tools to be able to liberate yourselves. But at the same time, there's also some sadness that these circumstances happen, or there's this erasure of our history, right? And so, but I think that's like a good and healthy sort of mix, right? That really serves to animate and motivate us moving forward, right? And saying, hey, look, the work is not over, right? The work is not done. As a matter of fact, it's just beginning, right? And these are the types of things that can kind of give us that energy in that life, right? To sustain and move on.
Yeah. And I feel like we need more of that on campus, though. I mean, it would be so nice to have, you know, just more of that imagery around campus, especially that image of like persistence and continuing on and remembering what all our ancestors went through. You know, I think it'd be so helpful for students to get to have that.
You know, Carmen,
for me too.
Like thinking about like no one, like these students didn't necessarily ask anybody,
right?
Hey, you know, can we, like, they're like, this is what we want to do. Maybe like part of like our responsibility, maybe as faculty, right, is that we need to be more explicit with our students and saying, hey, look, if there's something that you want, do it, go for it. I guess you need to ask some permission, I guess, in some way, right? But like whatever you feel like you need here, like it's attainable. You can do it and go for it, right? And we'll figure the details out. I mean, like, I think just generally, the faculty and administrators on this campus, I think generally, right, as a whole, maybe we need to be more explicit or do a better job of saying, hey, like, this is your space as well, right? Yeah. And how you envision it, how you imagine it, like, that's what it should be.
So true. So very true.
It makes me think, you know, like, because we're in the humanities, right? And we all have the opportunity to kind of like have students create things. And especially in English, we have the opportunity to have students create proposals, right? Create projects and proposals and things. And I don't know, like my mom works at NUMMI, the car plant, right?
Yeah.
And so like every year they would do this thing to make the staff employees feel like a part of a family or part of the company. They would have the kids draw things. The people who got picked would be in the calendar, and then they'd be like, or featured on something or something like that, right? I know it's a terrible capitalist way of trying to make you feel like I feel like it's a capitalist manipulation, right? Because it's like your mom's looking at your picture while she's at work all the time. but you know, it did do something to kind of like to bring us in, right? To know that I was in my mother's space. Right, like that I was somewhere there, and that so were all the other little kids that their moms and dads were going to the factory, right? You know, I wonder if it's like a charge of ours, like you said, like it's up to us faculty, help find ways to have students start knowing, you know, like need to insert themselves in the space, and here's an avenue, right? Like if I make one of my projects in class to be create a proposal and an argument for why this art needs to be on campus based on fighting against oppressive tools that have been used or blah, blah, right? You know, like, and we kind of like start collecting those things. I think it would be really cool to see what comes out of that.
No, I think that sounds amazing. I think you're right. I think there's so many ways that like individually through our curriculum, through our work, right, that we can sort of encourage or expose, right, folks to be able to, like you said, insert themselves on this campus. Before the pandemic, I would regularly do these research projects with the students at the end of the year. I still do the research. They do a research paper, but I would usually do like a little symposium at the end of the year. We would kind of take over the lobby in 400 and have posters, and, we'd have a little bit of food, but like, inevitably I would sort of push a couple artists onto my students, and they would sort of end up researching and writing and talking about that. But I think there's all kinds of different and important and creative ways that students can sort of get those important sort of transferable skills that they're going to need when they leave our spaces, but that can also help them, right, really define themselves and mark themselves and understand themselves here on this campus while they're here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I don't, we could always be making art in our classes too, incorporating that. And I was thinking a lot about the Dia de los Muertos and all the altars that happen on campus, and the different groups that do that. And that's another way of like bringing ourselves and bringing art on the campus. And yeah, I wonder about just even having our students create art and putting it up, that maybe we don't always have to wait for money or a muralist, that we could just do it ourselves too in some ways, right? Both and. Yeah. So good.
Let me see. We've covered a lot, but I want to make sure that we don't miss anything.
Yeah, it's so good to just talk about, just how to beautify the campus and the representation piece. I think that that's just so important. And I don't think that people really understand how important it is to see yourself in the art around you and just be reflected back to you and kind of the messages that it sends. So I'm super glad we got to talk about that today.
Yeah, no, Carmen, I think you're right. Like, I think those public spaces, right? Those public sites, they're important, I think, for a lot of different reasons. That sort of like ability that public art has to sort of transform those spaces into like spaces of knowledge production, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're saying, when I look at Lizzie's mural, I'm learning something, right? So it's like knowledge production. It presents a moment for collective reflection, right? About sort of where you're at, like what this community's about, but also like, as I mentioned, right, these notions of like protest until liberation, it really is also like this space for like democratic advocacy, right? In this really important visual aesthetic way, And so I think like remembering like all of those really important elements, right, that public art and public memory can have, will really sort of serve us sort of moving forward, right? I think going back to your first question, Monique, right, about what gives us life, I think like this, gives me life every time I see it, And without question, anytime there's some sort of event or anything that I'm part of, like it all culminates in me and all the students taking a picture in front of this mural. Like that's what we have to do. Like that's how we sort of mark it. Anytime my son is on campus, we go and I take a picture of him in front of this mural. It really is sort of this important marker, I think, for us, on this campus.
Well, it's also a legacy too. I mean, you, Kay, the instructors, Dion, the students, everyone that helped make it happen. It's like there's something here that's going to be here, once we retire, and you had a huge role in making that happen. So I just hope that there's a lot of pride that you get to feel in that too.
I would say a very tiny role, Carmen, a very tiny role in this, but I was, on board 100%, this opportunity presented itself. So yeah, I appreciate it.
So when you're like, last question, right? When you're like dreaming, and especially because I know that you probably have like some Chabot history, right? You can't help but come here and think about like what's going on and what's been happening here, right? Like, what do you hope ends up popping up in art that tells stories and histories that you actually don't see being told on the campus?
Yeah, no, I that again, great question. So like part of what I'm doing right now is I'm on the building 600 user group, right? So that's the new library building, right? And right now we're having intentional conversations with folks about how we want that space to look in terms of like the artwork that's going to go up there. So working, right, like from these early stages, like, I mean, have you all been seeing it, right? From like the green fence and the hole in the ground to like, if you walk over there, like that, there's a building up there now, right? It's like, and I imagine in the next year, this time, people are going to be getting ready to move in, right? And so what I imagine, what I hope is that there's real opportunity for a commitment with funding in particular, right? As you mentioned, right, Monique, we are living in a capitalistic world, right? So that's an important factor to this, but like not just a financial commitment, but also a commitment to really be able to sort of share and insert those experiences of our varied students on this campus, right? I think we need to have the opportunity to have as many distinct and diverse experiences on our walls, right? In these buildings, right? To really, again, you know, like be inspiration for our students, right? To really sort of send the message, right? Like we have all of these values, right? And these mission statements for our campus. Like here is a very explicit and direct way that we can sort of like apply those things, right? And say, look, if we want to be a more equitable or more just, right, campus and society and feel welcoming and opening at campus, right, to this community, like here's a very, like I would say, thoughtful and easy way to do that, right, is to have more spaces, right, that sort of show, right, the distinct experiences of our varied community. I think that's what I imagine. I imagine that new library building filled with all kinds of amazing art from all kinds of local folks that, you know, really speak to the distinct experiences, right, of our community. Yeah.
Mm.
Nice. Cool. Hope that happens.
I hope so too.
Working on it. We're working on it for sure.
You need help fighting for that, let us know. So usually we end the show with talking about a little recommendation, right? So, you know, the recommendation can be connected completely to what we've been talking about, or the recommendation can be just something like, hey, people get out and see this or do that or whatever, you know? Since we've come to the end, we have our recommendations. So, Carmen, you got anything in mind? I always go to Carmen because she gives me the shows.
I know the shows.
But it doesn't have to be a show. It could be anything.
Well, actually, I've been reading this book. It's called Real Self-Care. And it's by, oh man, it's an Indian woman. But I really, really like it because what she's doing is critiquing by Pooja Lakshman, I think. Yes. But what she's doing is criticizing the whole wellness industry. Mm-hmm. So she's saying how, like, you know, we're, especially as women, like we're really sold like, oh, just go to the spa or massage or get your nails done or do these things, and that is self-care. But like real self-care is about setting boundaries for yourself, kind of figuring out what your values are and like making really hard decisions and changing systems, right? Changing the entire system so that it's better supportive of humans. So she's really talking about kind of this internal revolution that can be a bigger revolution in systems change. And so I really like it. And she's not like dissing those things. She's just saying that that's actually not self-care. It's just a self-care that we're kind of sold to placate us and not really challenge these systems of oppression. So I'm enjoying that. So my recommendation is that book, Real Self-Care, and also just, you know, setting boundaries if you need it, saying no. Yeah.
Juan Pablo, you got one?
I do. Yeah, I was hoping for a show, Carmen. From our sin days, caught up on all the shows from Carmen, but I hadn't had those in the past couple of years. But,
well, I will tell you, I did create like a Carmen's Best Shows 2022 list, and I will send that to you.
So yeah, I have a really cool recommendation in addition to kind of like the Amalia Mesa Baines retrospective in Berkeley. But in San Jose, at the San Jose Museum of Art, they're having an upcoming exhibit. It's going to start, I think, in the first or the second week of July, and it's called Yolanda Lopez, The Portrait of an Artist, or of the Artist. And so she's this amazing, again, another amazing Chicana artist. She's really famous for like reimagining like the image of the Virgen de Guadalupe, right? That iconic image, right? In the Mexican-American community. Iconography is really important and significant. She's done a take on it where instead of the Virgen, she has like a woman on a sewing machine, right? Kind of, you know, with the backdrop, right? That she has a woman like marathon runner on there. So she's like just like this amazing artist that sort of really focuses on sort of feminist and working class empowerment. She's having a whole exhibit coming up at the San Jose Museum of Art starting this summer. And I think it'll last through maybe October or something, right? So through the fall. San Jose is a nice place to hang out in during the summertime, right?
Weather's so good. Yeah.
And the museum, right, is kind of right on the corner there, like by the park. So the park is there, and then maybe a block and a half from San Pedro Square, and then maybe 3 blocks from the university there that you can kind of walk through and see a lot of cool art. So it's like a really cool, like maybe day trip, that you can see a lot of art and, spend some time chilling in the park and grabbing some food or some drinks at, San Pedro Square. That would be my recommendation. Yeah.
Nice. That's fantastic. I'm going to look into taking my class there. Because like I was telling you, we're reading the book Gordo. And a lot of the vegan imagery comes up, right? And what does that mean? And
perfect. This would be perfect.
Connect those. That's cool. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So my recommendation is also a book. I'm not good with the shows. I only watch what Carmen tells me to. So right now I'm reading this book called Bloody Woman by Lana Lopesi. She's coming from the Pacific Islands and looking at like traditions around women, and also looking about the colonization of the islands and how that has impacted women. And also how what's interesting, how people have studied the cultures and reported out. And how, because they're coming from another place and studying that culture, that they don't actually understand what is happening. And so they're reporting out things that aren't factual, right? And so they're like the reports, the history that we have about indigenous peoples in these areas is wrong, because the people who are coming don't actually understand the culture to actually be able to write about it. All right. And so she's kind of rewriting the things that have been looked at. And it's really, like for me, especially, you can't actually get the text, the physical text here. You can only get it on like Kindle or, like those ways. It's only sold in the Pacific Islands. And I feel a need to like read more stuff from Pacifica people, right? So that way we can start getting it here, right? Like, and just like, cause especially being from Hayward, large Tongan and Samoan population. And I'm trying to find resources to actually like put those things in my classroom. And almost everything is like, oh, you can't get it. You can only get it in Australia, or you can only get it in Hawaii, or you can only, and for like that there, as if there's not a market here. Right. And that's not true. There's a huge market here. And so then it's really like the continued kind of like keeping people away. Like Lana Lopesi works at Oregon State. Like, so it's like, in our book, you can't get it here, and so it's just kind of like, it's been really frustrating. So I'm just trying to like advocate for more people to read stuff that you can't. And even, I don't know, I'm sure there's more things like that, books and stuff that you can't get here that would give us actual information about places that we're talking about all the time, and that come from the people who live in those places, right? Or have family and histories in those places. And so that's my recommendation, is to read Bloody Woman. It's really good.
Write it down.
So Real Self-Care and Bloody Woman.
I will give you guys one show recommendation, and it's called Beef on Netflix.
Oh.
Have you seen it?
No.
I've seen the trailer. Ali Wong, right?
Yeah, Ali Wong and Steve Yuen. It's so good. It's probably like the highest quality thing I've seen on Netflix. It's really, really good.
It seems intense. It seems real intense.
It is intense. It's kind of, it's like a, what do they call it? Like a black comedy.
Okay.
So it's funny, but it's dark, but it's good. It's really good.
Thanks. Thank you for that, because then I would have nothing to
I gotta get something.
And thank you so much, Juan Pablo. It was so great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the delay.